The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as General Marcus Iron Fist Rodriguez stepped out of his black SUV. His weathered face bore the scars of 25 years in the Navy SEALs, and his steel-gray eyes had seen more combat than most soldiers could imagine. At 52, he commanded respect through presence alone, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of countless successful missions and the burden of decisions that had saved thousands of lives. The compound buzzed with activity as Rodriguez made his way toward the briefing room. Young recruits snapped to attention as he passed, their backs rigid with military precision. He barely acknowledged them, his mind focused on the morning's agenda. Intelligence reports suggested a new threat emerging in Eastern Europe, and his team needed to be ready for deployment within 48 hours. As Rodriguez approached the main building, he noticed a woman standing near the entrance, apparently lost and confused. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and wearing civilian clothes that seemed out of place in the military environment. Her jeans and simple white blouse suggested she was a visitor, perhaps someone's family member who had wandered into the wrong area. The woman held a small notebook in her hands and kept glancing around nervously, clearly uncertain about where she should be going. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, which immediately irritated Rodriguez. This was a secure military facility, not a shopping mall where people could wander around aimlessly. Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he watched her take a step toward the restricted area where classified briefings took place. His protective instincts, honed by decades of protecting sensitive operations, kicked into high gear. Too many security breaches had occurred in recent months, and he wasn't about to let another one happen on his watch. "Excuse me," Rodriguez barked, his voice carrying the authority of command across the courtyard. Several nearby soldiers immediately stopped what they were doing and turned to see what had caught their general's attention. The woman looked up, seemingly surprised by the harsh tone. Her eyes met his briefly before she glanced down at her notebook again, as if checking something written there. "Ma'am, you need to stop right there," Rodriguez commanded, striding toward her with purpose. His boots clicked against the concrete with military precision, each step emphasizing his authority. "This is a restricted area. Civilians are not permitted beyond the main gate without proper escort and clearance." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that Rodriguez couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes that seemed almost amused, which only fueled his irritation further. "I think there might be some confusion," she began, her voice calm and measured despite the aggressive approach. "The only confusion here is how you got past security," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice rising. "I don't care who you think you are or who you're here to see. You will turn around and exit this facility immediately, or I will have you escorted out by armed guards." Several young soldiers had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the confrontation unfold. They had never seen their general so agitated over what appeared to be a simple case of a lost civilian. Rodriguez's reputation for maintaining strict security protocols was well known throughout the base, but his current reaction seemed excessive even by his standards. The woman remained remarkably calm under the verbal assault. She didn't flinch or step backward as most people would when faced with an angry military officer. Instead, she maintained eye contact and waited for him to finish speaking before responding. "General Rodriguez," she said quietly, using his name with a familiarity that caught him off guard. "I understand your concern for security, but I believe you're mistaken about my status here." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. The fact that she knew his name without him introducing himself set off alarm bells in his head. Either she had done research on the base personnel, which suggested premeditation, or she had been briefed by someone with inside knowledge. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, stepping closer to her. His imposing 6'3" frame usually intimidated people into compliance, but this woman seemed completely unaffected by his physical presence. "That's not important right now," she replied, glancing at her watch. "What is important is that we're both going to be late for the briefing if we continue this conversation much longer." Rodriguez's face flushed red with anger. The audacity of this civilian suggesting that she belonged in a classified military briefing was beyond comprehension. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled to control his temper. "Lady, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends right now." he growled. "You have exactly 10 seconds to produce proper identification and authorization, or I'm calling security to have you removed from this base." The woman sighed softly and reached into her back pocket. Rodriguez instinctively tensed, his hand moving toward his sidearm in case she was reaching for a weapon. Years of combat experience had taught him to be ready for anything, especially when dealing with unknown individuals who displayed unusual behavior. Instead of a weapon, she withdrew a slim leather wallet and extended it toward him. "I was hoping to avoid this level of drama," she said with what sounded like genuine regret. Rodriguez snatched the wallet from her hand and flipped it open, expecting to see a standard driver's license or visitor's pass that would prove she had no business being in the restricted area. What he saw instead made his blood run cold and his stomach drop to his boots. The identification card bore the official seal of the Central Intelligence Agency, along with the woman's photograph and a series of clearance codes that he recognized as being at the highest classification levels. The name on the card read, Agent Sarah Chen, Special Operations Division, but it wasn't just any CIA identification. The special markings and code numbers indicated that Agent Chen was part of an elite covert operations unit that worked directly with military special forces on the most sensitive missions. Rodriguez had worked with agents from this division before, and he knew that they only assigned their best operatives to work with SEAL teams. Rodriguez's hands trembled slightly as he examined the credentials more closely. The security features were all authentic, from the embedded holographic seals to the special paper that couldn't be replicated outside of official government printing facilities. There was no doubt that the identification was genuine. Agent Chen waited patiently while he processed the information, her expression neutral but her eyes reflecting a hint of sympathy for his obvious shock and embarrassment. She had clearly been through similar situations before and understood how jarring it could be for military personnel to discover they had challenged a superior officer. "The briefing room is through those doors, correct?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the building entrance where Rodriguez had been heading before the confrontation began. Rodriguez looked up from the identification card, his face now pale instead of flushed. The realization of what he had just done was sinking in rapidly. He had not only challenged a federal agent with higher clearance than his own, but he had done so in front of multiple witnesses and in a manner that could be considered unprofessional conduct. "Agent Chen, he began, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. "It's quite all right, General," she said, gently taking the wallet back from his shaking hands. "These things happen more often than you might think. The nature of covert work means that most people don't recognize us immediately." Rodriguez felt the eyes of his subordinates watching the exchange, and he knew that word of this incident would spread throughout the base within hours. His reputation as an infallible leader, who never made mistakes, was about to take a serious blow, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it. "I should have checked your credentials immediately," he said, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "It's standard protocol, and I failed to follow it." Agent Chen smiled for the first time since their encounter began. It was a warm, genuine smile that somehow made Rodriguez feel even worse about his behavior. "Actually, General, your security instincts were correct," she said. "A person in civilian clothes wandering around a classified facility should be questioned immediately. Your mistake was in the approach, not the initial suspicion." Rodriguez nodded slowly, grateful for her attempt to soften the blow to his ego, but still feeling the sting of humiliation. He had built his career on attention to detail and proper procedure, and his failure to request identification before launching into an aggressive confrontation was inexcusable. "Shall we proceed to the briefing?" Agent Chen asked, checking her watch again. "I believe we're about 5 minutes behind schedule now." As they walked toward the building together, Rodriguez couldn't help but steal glances at the woman beside him. Now that he knew her true identity, he began to notice details that he had missed before. Her casual posture wasn't relaxed carelessness but rather the controlled readiness of someone trained in combat. Her calm demeanor under pressure wasn't confusion but the professional composure of an experienced operative. The most unsettling realization was that Agent Chen had allowed him to continue his aggressive challenge for several minutes before revealing her credentials. She could have ended the confrontation immediately by showing her identification, but she had chosen to let it play out. Rodriguez wondered if this had been some kind of test, or if she had simply been curious to see how far he would push the situation. As they reached the entrance to the building, Rodriguez held the door open for Agent Chen. A gesture that felt inadequate given the circumstances. She nodded her thanks and stepped inside, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Rodriguez followed behind her, his mind racing with questions about the upcoming briefing and what role Agent Chen would play in whatever operation was being planned. He also couldn't stop thinking about how completely he had misjudged the situation and what that said about his abilities as a leader. The hallway leading to the briefing room was empty except for 2 armed guards stationed outside the door. They snapped to attention as Rodriguez approached, but their eyes lingered curiously on Agent Chen. It was clear that they had not been briefed on her presence, which meant that her involvement in the operation was known only to a select few high-ranking officials. As they reached the briefing room door, Agent Chen paused and turned to face Rodriguez. Her expression was serious now, all traces of her earlier amusement gone. "General, before we go in there, I want you to know that what happened outside doesn't leave this base," she said quietly. "Your reputation and your command are too valuable to compromise over a simple misunderstanding." Rodriguez felt a mixture of gratitude and renewed embarrassment at her words. The fact that a CIA agent was concerned about protecting his reputation made him realize just how badly he had handled the situation. "I appreciate that, Agent Chen," he replied. "But I also need to know if this was some kind of test of my security procedures or my judgment." Agent Chen studied his face for a moment before answering. "No, General. It wasn't a test. It was simply an unfortunate case of poor timing and miscommunication. These things happen in our line of work more often than anyone would like to admit." Rodriguez nodded, accepting her explanation even though he still had doubts about the true nature of their encounter. As they prepared to enter the briefing room together, he couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was going to change everything about the mission they were about to discuss. The briefing room fell silent as Rodriguez and Agent Chen entered together. 6 senior officers who had been engaged in quiet conversation immediately stood at attention, their eyes moving between their commanding general and the unfamiliar woman beside him. The tension in Rodriguez's shoulders was visible to anyone who knew him well, and his second-in-command, Colonel James Mitchell, immediately sensed that something significant had occurred before their arrival. At the head of the room stood Admiral Patricia Hawkins, a woman Rodriguez had served under during his early SEAL days, and someone he respected above all others in the military hierarchy. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing, and Rodriguez knew she had already assessed the dynamic between him and Agent Chen with the precision of a seasoned intelligence officer. "Gentlemen, please be seated," Admiral Hawkins said, her voice carrying the authority of decades in naval intelligence. "I'd like to introduce Agent Sarah Chen from the CIA's Special Operations Division. She will be briefing us on a developing situation that requires immediate attention from our best SEAL teams." Rodriguez took his usual seat at the conference table, but found himself studying Agent Chen as she moved to the front of the room with fluid grace. Now that he knew her true identity, he began to notice the subtle signs of her training that he had completely missed during their confrontation outside. Her movements were economical and purposeful, her awareness of everyone in the room was complete, and her posture suggested someone who could transition from calm discussion to deadly action in an instant. Agent Chen activated the large display screen at the front of the room, and satellite images of a mountainous region appeared. The terrain looked rugged and inhospitable, with scattered buildings that suggested a remote military installation of some kind. 48 hours ago, our assets in Eastern Europe reported unusual activity at this facility in the Carpathian Mountains. Agent Chen began, her voice now carrying the professional tone of a seasoned intelligence operative. "What appears to be a research station has been taken over by a group calling themselves the Red Dawn Collective." Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his personal embarrassment temporarily forgotten as his military instincts took over. The name Red Dawn Collective was familiar from recent intelligence reports, but they had been considered a minor terrorist organization with limited capabilities. Initial reports suggested this was a simple hostage situation involving civilian researchers. Agent Chen continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas of the satellite imagery. "However, Our investigation has revealed that this facility was actually conducting classified weapons research for NATO allies, and the hostages include several scientists with knowledge of advanced chemical warfare systems. Admiral Hawkins interrupted with a question that Rodriguez was about to ask himself. Agent Chen, what's the current status of the hostages? And do we have confirmation of the weapons research claims? Agent Chen clicked to the next slide, which showed detailed blueprints of the facility's interior layout. We have confirmation from our source inside the facility that 12 hostages are being held in the main laboratory building. Our source also reports that the Red Dawn Collective has gained access to chemical weapons prototypes that could cause massive casualties if deployed in populated areas. Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken as the scope of the mission became clear. This wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a race against time to prevent a potential chemical weapons attack that could kill thousands of innocent people. The terrorists are demanding the release of their leader, Viktor Kozlov, who is currently in a maximum security prison in Germany, Agent Chen explained. They've given a deadline of 72 hours, after which they threaten to release the chemical agents into the local water supply and then transport additional weapons to major European cities. Colonel Mitchell spoke up from across the table. Agent Chen, what intelligence do we have on the security measures at the facility and the number of terrorists we're dealing with? Agent Chen's expression grew more serious as she advanced to surveillance photos showing armed figures moving around the facility perimeter. Our estimates suggest between 15 and 20 heavily armed militants. They've established defensive positions around the facility and appear to have military-grade equipment, including anti-aircraft weapons that would make a helicopter assault extremely dangerous. Rodriguez studied the photos carefully, his tactical mind already working through potential assault scenarios. The mountainous terrain would make approach difficult, and the defensive positions suggested that the terrorists had significant military training. There's another complication, Agent Chen said, her voice carrying a note of concern that made everyone in the room pay closer attention. Our source inside the facility has gone silent as of 6 hours ago. We don't know if their position has been compromised or if they're simply unable to communicate safely. Admiral Hawkins stood and moved closer to the display screen, examining the facility layout with the expertise of someone who had planned countless military operations. Agent Chen, I need to know about your source. Are we talking about an undercover agent or someone who was already at the facility when it was taken over? Rodriguez watched Agent Chen's face carefully as she considered her answer. There was a slight hesitation that suggested the question touched on classified information that even this high-level briefing wasn't cleared to discuss. Our source is a deep-cover operative who has been monitoring weapons research activities in this region for the past 18 months, Agent Chen finally replied. Their identity and specific mission parameters are classified above your current clearance level. But I can assure you that their intelligence has been completely reliable until now. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications of what Agent Chen was saying. If the CIA had a deep cover operative inside the facility, and that person had gone silent, it meant either the operative was dead, captured, or so deeply embedded that they couldn't risk communication without exposing their cover. What's our timeline for mission launch? Rodriguez asked, already knowing that speed would be crucial to success. 36 hours maximum, Admiral Hawkins answered before Agent Chen could respond. We need to assume that the longer this situation continues, the more likely it becomes that either the hostages will be killed or the chemical weapons will be deployed. Agent Chen nodded in agreement and advanced to the next slide, which showed detailed terrain maps and weather forecasts for the target area. The good news is that weather conditions will be optimal for the next 48 hours. Cloud cover will provide concealment for approach, and wind patterns will disperse any chemical agents that might be accidentally released during the assault. Rodriguez stood and moved closer to examine the terrain maps. His experience with mountain warfare told him that the approach would be treacherous, even under ideal conditions, and the presence of anti-aircraft weapons meant that air support would be limited. Agent Chen, I need to know everything about the facility's construction and layout, he said. Are we dealing with reinforced concrete, steel structure, underground levels, and what about ventilation systems that could be used for access, or that might spread chemical agents if damaged? Agent Chen smiled slightly, and Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the same expression she had worn outside when he was challenging her credentials. It was as if she had been waiting for him to ask exactly that question. The facility was built in the 1960 seconds as a Soviet-era research station, she explained, calling up architectural drawings that showed far more detail than Rodriguez had expected. The main laboratory building is reinforced concrete with steel supports, but there are maintenance tunnels that connect to the older sections of the facility. These tunnels were originally designed for utilities, but could potentially provide access routes that bypass the main defensive positions. Colonel Mitchell studied the tunnel diagrams with interest. Agent Chen. How current is this information? If these tunnels exist, the terrorists would likely know about them and have them guarded or blocked. That's where our silent source becomes crucial, Agent Chen replied. Their last communication included detailed updates on which access points were being monitored and which appeared to be overlooked by the terrorist forces. Rodriguez felt the pieces of a tactical plan beginning to form in his mind. A multi-pronged approach using the maintenance tunnels for infiltration while creating a diversion at the main entrance could work, but it would require precise timing and flawless execution. How many SEAL team members are you thinking for this operation? He asked Admiral Hawkins. 2 full teams, she replied immediately. 16 operators total, plus support personnel for communications and medical backup. You'll be leading the operation personally, General. Rodriguez nodded, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with preparing for a high-stakes mission. Despite his earlier humiliation with Agent Chen, his confidence in his tactical abilities remained unshaken. Agent Chen will be accompanying the teams as intelligence liaison, and to help identify the chemical weapons once we gain access to the laboratory. Admiral Hawkins continued. Rodriguez turned to look at Agent Chen with surprise. It was unusual for CIA operatives to participate directly in SEAL operations, especially missions involving significant combat risk. With respect, Admiral, wouldn't Agent Chen be more valuable coordinating intelligence support from a remote location? He asked. Direct participation in the assault could compromise her cover for future operations. Agent Chen's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez detected something in her eyes that suggested his question had touched on sensitive territory. General Rodriguez, my participation in this mission is not optional, she said quietly. There are aspects of the situation inside that facility that require my direct involvement. I can't provide more details at this clearance level, but my presence during the assault is absolutely critical to mission success. Admiral Hawkins nodded in agreement. Agent Chen's participation has been authorized at the highest levels of government. Your job, General, is to ensure her safety while she accomplishes her objectives inside the facility. Rodriguez felt a growing sense that this mission was far more complex than it appeared on the surface. The presence of a deep cover operative, Agent Chen's insistence on direct participation, and the classification levels surrounding various aspects of the briefing all suggested that there were significant details being withheld from the tactical team. Are there any other mission parameters or restrictions that my team should be aware of? He asked, looking directly at Agent Chen. She hesitated for a moment before responding, and Rodriguez could see her weighing how much information she could safely share. The chemical weapons research at this facility includes some experimental compounds that have never been tested outside of controlled laboratory conditions, she said carefully. If any of these substances are released during the assault, the contamination could spread far beyond the immediate area and persist for years. Colonel Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Agent Chen, are you saying that this mission could result in permanent environmental damage to the entire region? I'm saying that we need to be extremely careful about how we conduct the assault, she replied. Any plan that involves explosives or heavy weapons near the laboratory areas could trigger a chemical disaster that would make Chernobyl look like a minor incident. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Not only did they need to rescue the hostages and prevent a terrorist attack, but they had to do it without causing an environmental catastrophe that could affect millions of people. This changes everything about our tactical approach, he said, his mind already revising the assault plans he had been considering. We're looking at a precision operation that requires surgical strikes with minimal collateral damage. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Exactly, General. This is why your SEAL teams were specifically requested for this mission. The level of precision required is beyond the capabilities of conventional forces. As the briefing continued with detailed discussions of equipment, timing, and contingency plans, Rodriguez found himself watching Agent Chen with growing respect. Her knowledge of military tactics was impressive, and her understanding of the technical aspects of the chemical weapons suggested extensive specialized training. By the time the meeting concluded 2 hours later, Rodriguez had developed a grudging admiration for the CIA operative he had so thoroughly misjudged earlier that morning. Whatever her background and training, it was clear that Agent Chen was exactly the kind of professional he would want beside him during a dangerous mission. As the other officers filed out of the briefing room, Rodriguez approached Agent Chen with a mixture of apology and curiosity. "Agent Chen, I owe you an apology for my behavior outside," he said. "I let my security concerns override my professionalism, and that was inexcusable." She smiled and extended her hand for a firm handshake. "General, in 12 hours we're going to be depending on each other's skills and judgment in a life-or-death situation. What happened this morning is already forgotten." Rodriguez shook her hand, noticing the calluses that suggested extensive weapons training and the grip strength that indicated serious physical conditioning. Whatever Agent Chen's background, she was clearly prepared for the challenges ahead. "I have one question, though," he said as they prepared to leave the briefing room. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" Agent Chen's smile became enigmatic. "Long enough to know that first impressions are almost always wrong, General. Tomorrow, you're going to see capabilities that might surprise you." As they walked out of the briefing room together, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that Agent Chen's words carried implications far beyond what she had actually said. The mission launched at 0300 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for the helicopter insertion. Rodriguez sat in the lead aircraft beside Agent Chen, both of them wearing full tactical gear and night vision equipment. The two SEAL teams had spent the previous day rehearsing the assault plan on a mock-up facility, but Rodriguez knew that no amount of preparation could account for every variable they might encounter. Agent Chen had surprised everyone during the equipment briefing by requesting specialized gear that most intelligence operatives never used. Her kit included advanced climbing equipment, breaching charges, and weapons that suggested combat training far beyond standard CIA protocols. When Rodriguez had questioned the unusual requests, she had simply replied that her mission parameters required her to be prepared for any contingency. As the helicopters approached the drop zone 15 kilometers from the target facility, Rodriguez reviewed the final assault plan one more time. His Alpha team would create a diversion at the main entrance, while Bravo team, led by Colonel Mitchell and accompanied by Agent Chen, would infiltrate through the maintenance tunnels. The timing had to be perfect to avoid alerting the terrorists to the tunnel approach before the diversion began. 2 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced through the communication system. Rodriguez looked at Agent Chen, who was checking her equipment with the methodical precision of a seasoned operator. Her calm demeanor remained unchanged, but he noticed that her breathing had shifted to the controlled pattern that combat veterans use to manage pre-mission adrenaline. "Agent Chen, once we're inside the facility, what's your specific objective?" he asked over the aircraft noise. She turned to meet his eyes, and Rodriguez saw something there that he hadn't noticed during the briefings. Behind her professional composure was the intensity that suggested personal stakes in the mission's outcome. "My primary objective is to secure the chemical weapons and ensure they can't be weaponized," she replied. "But there's something else I need to find in that laboratory." Before Rodriguez could ask for clarification, the pilot announced their arrival at the drop zone. The teams rappelled into the darkness with practiced efficiency, landing in a rocky clearing that provided concealment while they organized for the approach march. The 15-kilometer trek to the facility took 3 hours through mountainous terrain that tested even the exceptional conditioning of the SEAL teams. Agent Chen kept pace with the operators without apparent difficulty, moving through the darkness with the sure-footed confidence of someone accustomed to challenging environments. As they reached the final observation position overlooking the facility, Rodriguez studied the target through high-powered night vision scopes. The terrorist defensive positions were exactly where the intelligence had predicted, but there were more guards than expected, and their patrol patterns suggested military discipline rather than amateur enthusiasm. "These aren't typical terrorists," Colonel Mitchell observed quietly. "Look at their movement patterns and equipment placement. We're dealing with professional soldiers." Agent Chen moved beside them to examine the facility through her own scope. The Red Dawn Collective has been recruiting former military personnel from several Eastern European countries, she said. Our intelligence suggests their leadership includes at least 3 former Special Forces officers. Rodriguez felt his tactical assessment of the mission shift as he absorbed this new information. Professional soldiers would be far more dangerous than typical terrorists, and their defensive preparations would be much more sophisticated. Agent Chen, this changes our risk assessment significantly, he said. Are there any other details about the opposition that we should know before we proceed? She was quiet for several seconds before responding, and Rodriguez sensed that she was wrestling with classification protocols about how much information she could share. General, there's a possibility that one of the hostages isn't actually a hostage, she said finally. Our silent source might be maintaining their cover by appearing to be captured along with the legitimate researchers. Rodriguez stared at her in shock. You're telling me that your deep cover operative might be inside the facility pretending to be a hostage? And we're planning an assault that could result in that person being killed by either the terrorists or our own forces? It's a possibility we have to consider. Agent Chen replied calmly. Deep cover operations sometimes require maintaining identity, even when rescue becomes available. Colonel Mitchell shook his head in disbelief. Agent Chen, this is exactly the kind of information that should have been included in our tactical briefing. How are we supposed to distinguish between legitimate hostages and undercover operatives during a dynamic assault? Agent Chen reached into her tactical vest and withdrew a small electronic device that Rodriguez didn't recognize. This will identify our operative through biometric scanning, she said. Once we're inside the laboratory, I can locate them without compromising their cover. Rodriguez realized that Agent Chen's insistence on participating directly in the assault was beginning to make more sense. She wasn't just along for intelligence support. She was there to ensure the safety of an undercover operative whose identity was known only to her. How many other surprises should we expect during this mission? Rodriguez asked, his frustration with the incomplete intelligence beginning to show. General, covert operations by their very nature involve information that can't be shared at standard classification levels, Agent Chen replied. I understand your frustration. But some details can only be revealed as they become operationally necessary. Rodriguez accepted her explanation with reluctance, knowing that arguing about classification protocols wouldn't change the situation. He turned his attention back to the facility and began finalizing the assault timeline with his team leaders. At 0630 hours, Alpha Team moved into position for the diversionary attack on the main entrance. Rodriguez watched through his scope as his operators took their positions around the facility's front gate. The plan called for them to begin the diversion at exactly 0700 hours, giving Bravo Team 15 minutes to reach the laboratory through the maintenance tunnels. Colonel Mitchell led Bravo Team, including Agent Chen, to the tunnel entrance that satellite imagery had identified on the facility's eastern side. The access point was concealed behind overgrown vegetation, and it took several minutes to clear enough brush to allow entry into the underground passages. Rodriguez monitored both teams' progress through encrypted radio communications, while maintaining overwatch of the facility's defensive positions. The terrorists showed no signs of awareness that assault teams were approaching, but their alert status suggested they were expecting some kind of rescue attempt. At 0655 hours, Bravo Team reported that they had successfully infiltrated the tunnel system and were moving toward the laboratory building. Agent Chen's voice came through the communication system with updates on their progress, and Rodriguez was impressed by her tactical awareness as she described the route conditions and potential obstacles. Alpha Leader, this is Bravo Leader, Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. We've reached the laboratory access point. Agent Chen has confirmed the location of the chemical weapons storage area. Request permission to begin facility penetration. Rodriguez checked his watch and confirmed that the timing was perfect for the coordinated assault. Bravo Leader, you are cleared to begin penetration. Alpha Team will initiate diversion in 60 seconds. Rodriguez signaled to his Alpha Team leaders, and exactly 60 seconds later, explosive charges detonated at the facility's main gate, creating enough noise and chaos to draw the attention of every terrorist defender. As planned, the guards immediately repositioned to counter what appeared to be a frontal assault, leaving the laboratory building's rear access points temporarily undefended. Bravo team is inside the laboratory, Colonel Mitchell reported. We have visual contact with approximately 8 hostages in the main research area. No sign of guards in this section. Rodriguez felt a surge of relief as the plan proceeded according to schedule. But he knew that the most dangerous phase of the mission was just beginning. Once the terrorists realized that the main gate attack was a diversion, they would begin searching for the real assault team. Agent Chen has located the chemical weapons storage, Mitchell continued. She's proceeding to secure the materials while we establish hostage security. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see the terrorists beginning to realize that the main gate assault wasn't as serious as it had initially appeared. Several guards were already moving away from the front defenses to search other areas of the facility. Bravo leader, you need to accelerate your timeline, Rodriguez warned. The opposition is beginning to reposition, and you'll have company soon. Agent Chen's voice came directly through the radio system. General, I've found what we came for. But there's a complication. The chemical weapons aren't just prototypes. They're production-ready weapons with delivery systems already in place. Rodriguez felt his blood run cold as he realized the implications of Agent Chen's discovery. If the terrorists had access to production-ready chemical weapons with delivery systems, the threat level was exponentially higher than anyone had anticipated. Agent Chen, can you disable the delivery systems? He asked. Negative, she replied immediately. But I can prevent the weapons from being transported by destroying the storage facility. I need 5 minutes to place charges that will neutralize the chemical agents safely. Colonel Mitchell's voice interrupted with urgent concern. Agent Chen, we have terrorist forces approaching the laboratory. If you're going to destroy the storage area, we need to evacuate the hostages immediately. Rodriguez watched through his scope as armed figures began moving toward the laboratory building from multiple directions. The window for safe extraction was closing rapidly, and any delay could result in the assault team being trapped inside with the hostages. Bravo team, begin immediate hostage evacuation, Rodriguez ordered. Agent Chen, how much time do you need for chemical weapons neutralization? 3 minutes minimum, she replied. But General, there's something else. I've found our missing source, and they're not in good condition. They've been tortured for information, and I don't think they can travel without medical assistance. Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly as the mission became exponentially more complex. Not only did they have to evacuate 8 civilian hostages and neutralize chemical weapons under enemy fire, but they also had to rescue a severely injured undercover operative whose condition was unknown. Colonel Mitchell, what's your assessment of the tactical situation? Rodriguez asked. We can hold the laboratory for maybe 10 more minutes, Mitchell replied. After that, we'll be overrun. Agent Chen needs to finish her work quickly, or we're going to lose everything. Rodriguez made the command decision that would determine the mission's outcome. Alpha Team, increase pressure on the main defensive positions. Make them think that's where our primary assault is happening. Bravo Team, you have 8 minutes to complete all objectives and begin extraction. Agent Chen's voice came through the radio with a determination that impressed Rodriguez even under the dire circumstances. General, the charges are placed and the chemical weapons will be neutralized. I'm moving to extract our injured operative now. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes beginning to appear around the laboratory building as the terrorist forces engaged Bravo Team. The sound of gunfire echoed across the mountainous terrain, punctuated by the occasional explosion as his operators used breaching charges to maintain their diversionary assault. Bravo leader, status report, Rodriguez demanded, as the firefight intensified. We have 7 hostages secured and moving toward the extraction tunnel, Mitchell replied, between bursts of automatic weapons fire. Agent Chen is still in the laboratory section with the injured operative. She says she needs 2 more minutes. Rodriguez calculated the tactical timeline in his head and realized they were running out of time. The terrorist forces were converging on the laboratory building from 3 different directions, and his Alpha Team couldn't maintain their diversion much longer without risking casualties. Agent Chen, whatever you're doing, you need to finish it now, he ordered. The building is about to be overrun. Agent Chen's response came through heavy breathing and the sound of gunfire. General, our source is barely conscious and has multiple injuries. I can't move them quickly without risking permanent damage. Rodriguez faced the most difficult decision of his military career. He could order immediate extraction, which would save his SEAL teams and the civilian hostages, but abandon the injured operative and potentially leave chemical weapons intelligence in terrorist hands. Or he could hold position longer, risking the entire mission to save one person. Colonel Mitchell, can you reach Agent Chen's position with covering fire? Rodriguez asked. Affirmative. But we'll have to leave the tunnel entrance unguarded, Mitchell replied. If the terrorists discover our extraction route, we'll all be trapped. Rodriguez watched through his scope as terrorist forces closed in on the laboratory building. His tactical experience told him that holding position any longer was tactical suicide, but his military code demanded that no operator be left behind. Alpha Team, intensify assault on main positions, he ordered. Draw every available defender away from the laboratory. Bravo Team, provide covering fire for Agent Chen's extraction. The sound of intensified gunfire filled the mountain air as both SEAL teams executed Rodriguez's orders with lethal precision. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see terrorist forces being pulled back toward the main defensive positions as his Alpha Team created the impression of a major assault. Agent Chen's voice suddenly came through the radio with surprising clarity. General, I have our operative secured, and we're moving toward extraction. But there's something you need to know about the chemical weapons situation. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as Agent Chen's tone suggested more complications. What is it, Agent Chen? The weapons aren't just for terrorist attacks, she replied. Our operative discovered that they're part of a larger arms trafficking operation. This facility is one of several production sites, and there are chemical weapons shipments already en route to buyers in multiple countries. Rodriguez realized that the mission had just expanded beyond a simple rescue operation. If chemical weapons were being distributed through an international trafficking network, the threat extended far beyond this single facility. Agent Chen, do we have intelligence on the other production sites or the distribution network? He asked. Our operative has that information, but they're unconscious now and will need immediate medical attention, she replied. General, we need to extract everyone safely, so this intelligence can be properly analyzed. Rodriguez made his decision based on the tactical reality of the situation and the strategic importance of the intelligence they had discovered. All teams, begin immediate extraction. Agent Chen, you have covering fire for the next 3 minutes. Colonel Mitchell's voice confirmed the beginning of the extraction phase. Bravo Team moving toward tunnel exit with hostages and casualties. Agent Chen is carrying the operative, but movement is slow. Rodriguez coordinated with his Alpha Team to maintain maximum pressure on the terrorist positions, while Bravo Team made their escape through the maintenance tunnels. The timing was critical, and any mistake could result in the terrorists discovering the extraction route before everyone was clear. Alpha Leader, this is Bravo Leader, Mitchell's voice came through the radio. All hostages are clear of the facility and moving toward extraction helicopter. Agent Chen and the operative are 30 seconds behind us. Rodriguez felt a surge of relief as the mission entered its final phase, but he knew that the most dangerous moment often came during extraction, when teams were focused on escape rather than security. Agent Chen, status report, he called. General, we're clear of the facility, she replied, breathing heavily from the physical exertion of carrying an injured person through difficult terrain. The chemical weapons charges will detonate in 90 seconds. We need to be at minimum safe distance. Rodriguez quickly calculated the blast radius and evacuation timeline. The extraction helicopters were positioned far enough away to avoid the explosion, but the teams on foot needed to reach the pickup zone before the chemical weapons storage detonated. All teams, double time to extraction point, Rodriguez ordered. Helicopter pilots, prepare for immediate departure upon team pickup. As Rodriguez's Alpha Team began their withdrawal from the facility perimeter, he kept watch through his scope for any sign that the terrorists had discovered the real assault route. The deception had worked perfectly, with the enemy forces still concentrated around the main gate area where they expected the primary attack to continue. General, this is Agent Chen. Her voice came through the radio as she approached the helicopter landing zone. Our operative is stable but needs immediate evacuation to a trauma facility. They have critical intelligence about the weapons trafficking network that can't be delayed. Rodriguez signaled to the medical team standing by at the extraction helicopters. The specialized medics were prepared to treat severe injuries during the flight back to base, but serious trauma cases required facilities that weren't available in the field. Agent Chen, medical team is standing by, he confirmed. What's the condition of the other hostages? 7 civilian researchers, all in good physical condition but showing signs of psychological trauma from captivity, she replied. They'll need debriefing and counseling, but no immediate medical intervention required. Rodriguez felt the satisfaction of a successful mission as his Alpha team reached the extraction helicopters and began boarding. The precision timing had worked exactly as planned, with all objectives accomplished, and no casualties among the rescue forces. Agent Chen, I need to know about the chemical weapons neutralization, he said as the helicopter engines spun up for immediate departure. Are we certain that the threat has been eliminated? The storage facility will be completely destroyed in 15 seconds, she replied. The charges are designed to neutralize the chemical agents safely, so there won't be any environmental contamination. But General, this was just one facility. According to our source, there are at least 3 others still operational. Rodriguez absorbed this information as the helicopters lifted off and began the flight back to base. The successful rescue had prevented an immediate terrorist attack, but the discovery of an international chemical weapons trafficking network meant that the mission was really just the beginning of a much larger operation. As they flew through the dawn sky, Rodriguez looked at Agent Chen, who was monitoring the injured operative's vital signs with the expertise of a trained medic. Her performance during the mission had been flawless, displaying combat skills that exceeded most military special forces operators he had worked with. Agent Chen, he said over the helicopter noise, I owe you more than just an apology for this morning's confrontation. Your performance during this mission was exceptional. She looked up from checking the operative's pulse and smiled. General, there are things about my background that weren't included in the mission briefing. My training goes beyond standard CIA protocols. Rodriguez studied her face, recognizing the look of someone who had been through extensive military conditioning. Agent Chen, what exactly was your training before joining the CIA? Her smile became more enigmatic as she returned her attention to the injured operative. Let's just say that my experience with SEAL operations comes from more than just intelligence briefings, General. Rodriguez felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place as he realized that Agent Chen's exceptional combat skills and tactical knowledge weren't the result of CIA training alone. Her familiarity with military protocols, her physical conditioning, and her comfort in combat situations all pointed to a background that she hadn't revealed during their mission briefing. You were military before CIA, he said, making it a statement rather than a question. Agent Chen nodded without looking up from her patient. Marine Force Reconnaissance, 8 years of active duty including 3 combat deployments. I transitioned to CIA when they needed operatives with both intelligence skills and direct action capabilities. Rodriguez now understood why Agent Chen had been so calm during his aggressive confrontation that morning. She had faced far more dangerous situations than an angry SEAL general, and her military training had prepared her to assess threats accurately before responding. That explains a lot about your performance today, he said with genuine respect. Force recon operators are some of the best trained soldiers in any military. General, what happened outside the briefing room this morning taught me something important too, she replied. Your security instincts were absolutely correct. A person in civilian clothes near a classified facility should be challenged immediately. Your only mistake was not requesting credentials before making assumptions about my status. Rodriguez realized that Agent Chen was offering him a professional assessment that acknowledged both his error and his underlying competence as a security-minded officer. As the helicopter approached the base where intelligence analysts and medical teams were waiting to debrief the hostages and treat the injured operative, Rodriguez reflected on how completely his initial judgment of Agent Chen had been wrong. Her appearance as a confused civilian had been a perfect disguise that concealed capabilities that exceeded most military professionals. Agent Chen, when we debrief this mission, I want to make sure that your role in its success is properly documented, he said. Without your intelligence, preparation, and direct participation, we couldn't have achieved these results. She finally looked up from the operative and met his eyes directly. General, This mission succeeded because of exceptional teamwork between experienced professionals. Your tactical planning and your team's execution were flawless. Rodriguez felt a sense of professional satisfaction as the helicopter touched down at the base. Despite his embarrassing initial encounter with Agent Chen, the mission had been completed successfully, and he had gained a new respect for the capabilities of CIA operatives with military backgrounds. As medical teams rushed to transport the injured operative to the base hospital, and intelligence analysts prepared to debrief the rescued hostages, Rodriguez realized that this mission would be remembered not just for its tactical success, but for the important lesson it had taught him about making assumptions based on first impressions. Agent Chen gathered her equipment and prepared to accompany the injured operative to the medical facility, but she paused before leaving the helicopter. "General, the intelligence we recovered today is going to lead to a much larger operation against the weapons trafficking network," she said. "I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together again when that mission is planned." Rodriguez extended his hand for a firm handshake, this time with full knowledge of who he was dealing with. "Agent Chen, it would be an honor to serve alongside you again. Your skills and professionalism are exactly what these kinds of operations require." As Agent Chen disappeared into the medical facility with the injured operative, Rodriguez began his post-mission procedures with a new understanding of how dangerous it could be to judge people based on appearances rather than taking the time to verify their actual qualifications and authority. The successful mission had not only rescued innocent hostages and prevented a chemical weapons attack, but had also taught him a valuable lesson about leadership, assumptions, and the importance of treating all personnel with appropriate professional respect until their status could be properly confirmed. Rodriguez knew that when he wrote his after-action report, he would include a frank assessment of his initial handling of Agent Chen, not as self-criticism but as a learning point for other officers who might find themselves in similar situations, where appearances could be deceiving and first impressions could be dangerously wrong.